There you go. Okay. So yes, we do pay the price of our previous generation, or the not. I don't know the sins, not the sins, but like whatever they do has some kind of impact on. And how do we deal with that? In the sense that yes, on the one hand, the world is maybe collapsing or global climate change. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Dan.
I would like to, yeah, so I would like to talk about, okay, you hear me? Yeah, so I would like to talk about the individuals and how the boom, I mean, like the Generation X generation is actually paying for, I mean, they're actually helping individuals such as millennials and Gen Z because they're investing in our future and the individuals. And as we see these great institutions throughout the world, I mean, such as Department of Defense, Department of Energy, and things like that, it's just helping create a better, sustainable world. Uh, in order to create a better world, we need these resources, and they're finding multiple different ways and solutions to solve problems. So I don't believe you guys are killing the generation. I mean, the boomers and Gen X are killing the world, but actually helping sustain it for generations to come.
Great point. Thank you. Hmm. What's that? You can push back on that. Sure.
I want to push back on that because I think that analysis, while I understand where you're coming from, lacks a lot of nuance in the fact that all positive changes, I think, or policies that are being pushed forward by any institution that came prior to Gen Z is merely reactive and cleaning up the mess that they created in the first place, or that the generations before them created in the first place.
Sure.
We're not taking a proactive approach, and in that sense, it's more apologetic. I mean, the way I compare it is to like getting childhood trauma, but then your parents pay for your therapy. Like they totally fucked you over, and they may be helping you now, but the fact that they're helping you now doesn't really change the fact that they did something terrible to begin with. And I think when you apply that on like kind of a larger scale context, not necessarily like emotional trauma, but like you've destroyed the world around me, like I'm not going to use the fact that you're throwing out pithy like arguments now or like doing small things to like excuse the damage that you've done.
Okay. I'm not really sure that Rance's point was like he was pushing back against the first claim that these generations really destroyed us. Um, I guess then we can ask the question, well, why can it be a little bit of both in the sense that you are sitting here created by colonial powers in Richmond, Indiana, where we sort of exploited and pushed away people and created a British institution here in Richmond, Indiana, where other people used to live, and you are taking full benefit. I don't know, it's actually analogous to therapy, but taking full benefit of all these established institutions, and you live your life in a certain way with certain amount of comfort without disease. I mean, I shouldn't say that now, but with sort of different types of disease, etc. So again, you are right. I'm not saying you are wrong at all. It's just that that analogy makes it a little bit more dramatic than it might be, because all parents, including if you decide to be parent, your generation, you are all going to screw up your children. There is no escape from that. You are going to do that. You might be like the best person in the world, try to be your best, you'll still screw them up. That's for sure. So just be prepared for that. But then the question is, how are we going to understand ourselves with respect to that relationship with our previous generation and subsequent generation? Because a lot of people also talk about millennials and Generation Z, etc., in ways like, oh, all you do is to take advantage of all the things that are created for you and complain about it, blah blah. So there is really there is no like absolute truth here in terms of we can take that position and that will be, yeah, they were good or they were bad. It's just that even if they are bad, we are implicated in that. So we cannot escape that. Like Antigone didn't do anything. She is like, I, I mean, other than burying her brother, she hasn't done anything. Why is she cursed? Because of her father. Why was her father cursed? The poor guy was trying to avoid his fate. And then he fell into the fate that, so it is really like one major hubristic attitude is that we make our own destiny. We make it out. And this is really the, whether you are pro or against, the sort of American sensibility. We create our own history. We are not the products of our conditions. Sorry, Olivia, go ahead.
Sorry, I just felt kind of compelled to also note, since Rance brought up the Department of Defense, that the US Armed Forces is the single like greatest source of carbon emissions in the world, like literally of any institution. So I feel like the idea that they are creating a better world is, I mean, all the war and killing and, you know, leaving depleted uranium in developing countries and shit aside, like, I don't know, it's still a dubious claim.
I mean, I was giving just I was just giving Department of Defense as an example, but I mean, you could consider the United States American military to be like like the world peacekeepers. So I mean, you could say they do much good. I mean, much bad, but I believe the good outweighs the bad in that situation, and being the peacekeepers of the world.
I didn't hear what was said.
Can you be a peacekeeper? Sorry, if you commit war crimes, like. Yeah.
Go ahead, Dan.
Okay. Oh, I'm not defending that the war crimes, but I'm saying that we should. I mean, they still do much good for the world as a whole. Yeah.
Well, regardless of your judgment one way or the other, I want to say both, depending on what degree, because a lot of Americans believe that what you just said, that they are actually preventing war crimes that are happening, especially in the 90s, that was the rhetoric. So now that rhetoric has changed, maybe because we are in gratuitous wars, and historically that might be different. But again, regardless how you as American citizens feel about the US military, you are still living under its protection. That's the reality. Like whenever there is a terrorist attack, etc., everyone's like, oh, US intelligence, they are gonna protect us. You are implicated in this regardless of your opinion. We are implicated in this. I can be all radical, blah, blah. I teach at Earlham College, which is a British colonial institution. I take money from them and I feed my children with that. So we are implicated in this, whatever we are criticizing, because that's our fate. I mean, Earlham wasn't my fate, but they were the only ones who were giving me jobs. So at that time, so I was okay with that. But that's the reality. Now, again, I don't want to make this into like the indictment of American contemporary military. Well, we can talk about that. But I guess the point here is that Antigone and Oedipus and Creon they all are within that no generation can free the next. One of the gods will strike, there is no escape. I like that, that section. I mean, it is very realistic, actually. Whatever your opinions are, which you are totally cool, I think, you are still within that framework.
I would
Especially,
just like to say one thing to close, I guess. So,
you need to speak up a little bit because I can't hear you from here. So I
okay, okay, is this good?
That's
Okay, so the generation before us, they have some, they don't, they are able to get the generation before us, they have to work with what they had. They aren't with uh, the same intelligence nor technology capabilities that we have now. And so that's the point of our generation, is to continue to build upon that. And that's and finally, that's what I think Antigone was trying to express throughout the passage as well, that we need to that these laws need to be changed, and no, she shouldn't die. I mean, no, I mean, her brothers should be able to get a proper burial. And so I think that's the overall message of the entire, that we must continue to build.
I think that's a really great point because you're right. When she's actually saying that Creon's law should be changed. The unchanging laws of God should not be, because they command that the dead should be buried. So she is protecting that previous generations, or what God say, etc. So yeah, that further complicates the issue, and I, especially not belonging to your generation, I appreciate that attitude of previous generation. Um, and you're right in terms of every generation somehow gives a, I mean, I don't know, like better or worse, to evaluate it in terms of sort of normative claims is difficult. You can't say like, are we better off? Are we worse off? Are we morally more compromised? Were we morally more compromised in the past, etc.? And all generations would like to think that since we are further down the line, we are less compromised morally. Now we atone our sins or take care of what we did in the past, etc. But on the other hand, our lives might be better in terms of what happened in the Middle Ages in Europe. Like I saw, I show you that was about COVID too. That when first COVID came, so the personifying COVID with respect to Black Death in what Europeans racially called in the past, and then the Spanish flu, and how it is different, even in terms of our, response, because it could have been something like Spanish flu, which killed like what, 50, 100 million people. And with COVID, we are, maybe it's not as deadly, yes, as an actual virus, but also in terms of how we can sit here, take care of it technologically, continue with our classes, etc., in a way that they couldn't. So there's always the historical perspective. Anybody else wants to push back on that? Yes, Charlie, go ahead.
Not necessarily pushing back on what you said, but just kind of an idea that I thought of is when I read Dead Man's Grief Comes Back and Falls on Grief, it makes me think of just like so long as dead man's grief exists in thought and idea, then it's perpetuated by either the next generations, like Okonkwo-esque, like I'm going to overcompensate for my father's bad characteristics in begetting new the new bad, I mean the new like the generational flaws as a result of trying to overcompensate. So like us looking at like my generation looking at boomers and being like, oh my God, they were so horrible in this domain. And then that will inevitably lead us to try to overcompensate and lead to our own flaws. And so as long as dead man's grief exists as either a reference point or an idea, then there will be new grief or new flaws.
Yeah, that's a good interpretation. Interesting interpretation. No generation can free the next. So I like that. Yes, Nancy.
I can ask my question now if it's, I think it ties in a little bit. It seemed like so much about, it's all about this burial, but I wonder how much of it is actually about the dead people, or if it's pretty much if it's all about, especially between Antigone and, is it Ismena?
Ishmene, you can.
Yeah, like the different judgments of them and how it's kind of seen maybe that Antigone is the selfless one and she's, yeah, that it's selflessness, but yeah, is it actually anything about the dead people? And nowadays when people are generally a lot less religious than they were then, is burial even less about the people who've died?
Say that last thing again. I'm not sure I at least understood it.
As in the burials and all the rituals surrounded around death, is that for the living, and in comparison between cultures where religion is a lot more important, like it was for the ancient Greeks, is it even more so about the living because they're worried about their afterlives, or is it less so? Is it more so actually about the dead because they believe that the soul is still there and like still has stuff can still go bad for it?
That's like both cultural and metaphysical question. Okay, good. Jack.
Responding to what Nancy was just talking about. Last class, we had a small discussion about Antigone and whether she was selfless or selfish. And I touched on the point saying that by helping her, by burying her brother eventually, you know, I think it kind of gives a safe space towards the underworld to live with the dead. And I guess, you know, in many cases, like when we have like Christianity or if we have like Buddhism, you know, when you go to heaven and stuff like that, I feel like many of the things that people choose to do, or people choose not to commit crimes, maybe in some cases, especially in those days, the more barbaric times, it's a way to help regulate themselves, but at the same time, without those moral and religious regulations and, you know, ways of living, I feel like the world definitely would 100% would have been a worse place. So when we talk about like burials in medieval times and before, from 2,500 years ago, I definitely think the emphasis on respecting the dead is ultimately respecting themselves, because in 34 years they'll be dead as well.
But there is an expectation of continuation in the underworld. So your soul will continue to live. So yeah, that's it. That's a really good point. Okay. Why would they? Yeah.
Well, I guess because once you're dead, you know, you're living there for eternity. So you probably want to find a relatively nicer place, you know, instead of 7 burning levels of hell, for instance.
So do we now think that since we don't believe in afterlife as much as we used to, was that your point, Nancy, that therefore our rituals are more about the living than the dead?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Okay, Charlie.
In the case of it being more about the living than the dead, I think specifically in Antigone, the case line 560 speaks almost opposite to that, or so it seems, when Antigone says, "Take heart, you live. My life died long ago, and that has made me fit to help the dead." And so it seems like she's she doesn't care. She doesn't care about her life, and it's not bringing her any sort of solace in the earthly realm. And that was also just a line I was generally confused about.
Okay, let me clarify. I think Nancy's point was not about Antigone as much as a shift in history in terms of our. Was
Okay.
that right, Nancy? Am I making it up? Okay, so it's Jack who sort of said that we thought about Antigone being selfish or not, but putting that question aside, she is. It might be selfish, but she is doing it for what's his face, Polynices. So, but that line is very interesting. Like, why does she think she's already dead? Is she a ghost? Like, she's not even like a living being, but she's already a ghost.
Aren't we all just living? Aren't we all just
I
walking?
really cannot hear you. So I need.
Okay. Are we all walking corpses?
Yes, but we need to get there. I mean, if you just say it like that, then it's a little problematic. But yes, because we are ghosts, we are living dead, but there are some arguments or ideas to be developed to get to that point. But anyway, yeah.
Well, we were just kind of talking about why she said that, you know, she feels like she's dead already. Well, I think it's fairly easy to see that. Like, for instance, if I lost my mom, dad, my two brothers, I'd pretty much be absolutely out of it as well. So,
but this is when Creon calls both of them and are talking about who committed the crime, and Ishmene wants to take responsibility, but Antigone doesn't let her, and then she's saying this to Creon. It might be because I already know you are going to kill me. Go ahead, and then I say, yeah, that's it. You have to turn on your
like line 555, like where she was talking to Ismene.
line what?
555.
Okay.
Where she was talking to Ismene, and she was like, "Yes, for you chose to live when I chose death." Like basically, like what I was just understanding from her is that she knew the consequences of like what she was about to do, and I think that's what she means by my life died long ago. And when I made the decision that I'm gonna go against what Creon wanted, and then the other thing I wanted to say was that I feel like sort of yeah, just to give my take on like Nancy's question, I feel like the practices around death have always been for the living, like with the unconsciously or conscious of it. Like yeah, with Antigone, for example, she feels like she's doing her brother justice, but like at the same time, there's like elements of like how she doesn't want to suffer for not what's it called, taking care of her dead brother in the afterlife. Whereas now, like it's still for the living. It's just that like it's more about like consoling the living and like helping them overcome someone else's like death. So I just feel like it's always been about the living, just the different sort of like perspectives on how it benefits the living.
Okay. I can initially agree with that, assuming that we have the same understanding of death as the Greeks had. So that would be the question. Yes, it has always been to a certain extent about the living, you are right. Yet how do they understand death? How do we understand death? I mean, of course, we don't, because that's the definition of death. But with respect to our rituals, with respect to our ways in which we behave around the death, is showing a kind of understanding of what we think is going to happen. Does it not? So I don't know what Greeks were thinking. We could never know, like for sure. And they probably were not even agreeing with each other, but Antigone Yeah, I mean, again, these concepts are very, okay, never mind, forget it. Yes, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering. I was wondering with respect to this passage, like what it's saying about like this idea of hubris and like free will and individualism that we were kind of talking about earlier. Like she says specifically in that line Blessed just read out.
555?
Yeah, yes, for you choose to live when I chose death. But it seems in that other line that she feels much more fated to her destiny, like I'm already dead. And I think it kind of connects to her father, like he was hubristic to try and change his own destiny. And yet it seems in this play, all the characters that just kind of go along with what they think they have to do as their destiny and don't make any decisions, they're ultimately the ones that are punished at the end of the play. So I'm just curious what people think about that. Like,
That's an excellent question. So are you, if I'm understanding you correctly, you are asking why is Antigone doing what she's doing? Is she destined to do that?
yeah, I'm just it just seems strange to me that Oedipus was punished for being so hubristic as to fight against his destiny. Whereas it seems like Creon and Antigone just kind of go along with what they think their destiny is. What Creon in his case thinks is the destiny of a proper ruler, and Antigone, following the divine law. But it seems like they don't really show their free will and divert off their course, and yet they're still punished.
No, that's it. Yeah, that's because maybe they don't. It's not the same the way we understand free will and destiny. Yeah. No, that's a great question. Any thoughts about it?
I haven't maybe another question.
Oh, wait. Okay, I muted you. Go ahead, Charlie.
Yeah, so I just have another question of just like of the context in which this was created. Would Oedipus kind of be an anomaly in that he acted on individualistic ideas in a pre-individualistic society, and like how much did individualism exist back then in the time that this was written? Did people feel like they could act on their own values, or is like upholding the family name and acting on the situations which we see, like there's not even a thought of making your own personal choice?
Okay, let's think about that. Let's take like 5-minute break, and then when we come back, because I'm not really sure like even individualism and personal decision we understand in the same way that the Greeks do. So but it's 10, so let's take like a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back. Okay.
Could I re-ask the question then really quick before we leave? So I guess my question is, how was individualism thought of? Did it exist at the time? Like in ancient Greece, what was the thoughts of making your own decisions?
Excellent. Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, thank you. So in regards to Charlie's question, inquiry, it's a very difficult idea to figure out from what we read, but do you see Antigone or Creon or anybody for that matter in the play making an individual free decision independently of their context or history and determination, etc.? Yes, Jared.
Didn't Ismay choose to side with Antigone even though she didn't help with it?
Okay, so you are thinking with respect to the difference between Ismena and Antigone, we can try to figure out individual decisions.
Can you say that again?
Well, because Ishmene decided the opposite way as Antigone, right? So are you suggesting that therefore it's possible to make different individual decisions?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Okay. So what is Ishmene's, whatever, justification?
She like chooses to stay by her sister, right? Like, but I guess she is already charged, right, by Creon?
Well, what happens is, as you read, she doesn't help Antigone to bury the body, but then Creon says, "Oh, I saw her walking around in the palace or wherever. She must be accomplice." So he brings her in, and then and she wants to take responsibility for the action, but Antigone says, "No, you didn't. You chose life. I chose death. You should continue living." It's almost like that's your punishment. And Creon finally decides not to punish Ishmael. So, yeah, what's going on there? And also, like, something very interesting, like towards the end, in her last speech, after Antigone says, "Well, I cannot have another brother. I can always have another husband or child, etc. But brother, since my parents are that I can never have a brother." And then she says, "I am the last one in the line of the king," conveniently disregarding Ishmael, who is alive. Why does she do that? I mean, I feel for the minor characters in this play. Yeah.
I don't remember the specific context, like how far in the play she said that, but I think when I read that, I imagined it was because Ishmene had not honored Oedipus by leaving Polynices out to be eaten by the dogs, and so that's why she was no longer part of the line.
Yeah, but I mean, it's still like problematic because your sister didn't do what you did. You disqualify her from being in the family. I mean, she is there. She like if you're talking about like bloodline, it's the reality. She's there. She's not dead. So Antigone is not the last of the, which I don't know what to make out of that. Like, why does she say that? Yes, blessed.
Hey, those of us on Zoom can't hear what's being said right now.
Sorry.
Can you hear him now? Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, so like, yeah, I went back to line 82, where she was just like, "For me, don't worry, you clear your own fate." And like, I think, yeah, that's kind of like the idea I was getting from it, that like Antigone feels like this is what her destiny is, and she's not acting like, sort of, to go back to Charlie's question, outside her free will, but like this is like what she's destined to do. And Ishmael is like, she takes the decision. She's not supposed to take the same decision as Antigone in terms of like risking her life for her brother.
So she is fulfilling her destiny, and that's her free will, and our only free will is to fulfill our destiny. Which would be great. Like I would go with that explanation. because we always think of our destiny and free will in opposition. We always feel like freedom is just doing whatever you individually have decided to do, but it might not be that simple. But it's like, as you were talking, I was thinking, like these characters, like he created these characters of Opera State maybe like 2,500 years ago. The way in which they are so complicated, morally and sort of emotionally and psychologically, etc. And we are really used to playing out our dramas in terms of good and evil. These are the good ones, these are the evil ones. And in every drama in the contemporary society, somehow the good beats the evil and we are all relaxed at the end, etc. I wonder whether that also shapes our imagination in terms of how we see the world. Like there's good ones, and I'm definitely on that side. And then there are evil ones who are the other in whatever opposition that we are setting up. And I wonder whether we are sort of encouraging that in education, telling you like, you are one of the good guys, you are awesome, you will save the world. There are all these evil people out there that, yeah. Okay, Jack, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm actually talking about kind of what you were just saying. When you were talking about like the good and the bad and how that shapes our viewpoints, how that shapes how we see the world, and talking about like tragedies. Why did tragedies play such a big part, for instance, in ancient Greek philosophy? What was the point of it? Was it so that it could reflect maybe a certain time period of what was going on? Was it because tragedies make us learn lessons better? It helps advance our philosophical ideas more, or what? Like, why are tragedies so important, for instance?
I can speculate. I don't have an answer to that. Why? Yeah.
This is supposed to be because I'm assuming there are going to be hundreds of different answers for this.
Josue.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to add on to what you said about the good and the bad. I think there is definitely that good and bad, but also especially after the Greeks, there's also this kind of notion or sense that the bad are also good. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Also good.
sorry?
What did you say? I didn't hear those.
That the bad are also the good ones. So in the sense that, well, we can look at Antigone and say, well, in a very general, simplistic read, she's the bad one, right? Because she's not following what the law says in the state. Right, but we can also say that she's the good one and Creon is the bad one. We can say both. And I wanted to say that that's also very contemporary in the sense that, like, nowadays we have these movies where things like the Joker and all of these movies that make us kind of relate with the bad one. We sort of identify with the bad character, and so it's interesting, right, to play those two, right? Because where do we draw the line between good and bad? And if there is anything, is there a line even, you know?
I think that I would, to use Kate's expression, push back on that for a second, because I think that when we associate with bad characters like Joker, although I haven't seen the latest manifestation, that has already been established, good and bad. So you are associating with the evil because that is already decided. So in Antigone, the play, there is really the more fundamental undecidability between good and evil. And it is not symmetrical in the sense that, yes, we might maybe accept that what we consider to be evil might actually be good. That's possible if we see from their perspective, if we see what's going on, etc. The more difficult thing is, can you see the evil in the good? And I think that's what Sophocles is trying to force us to consider too, because when we think that we are good, it's much more difficult for us to accept that actually what we consider to be good for ourselves is producing evil in the world. And that is different than this almost sanctimonious attitude of the good, like, oh, I can see the good in the evil, but can you see the evil in the good? So I don't think that is symmetrical. And again, yes, that doesn't produce a sort of individualistic moral ambiguity, but the fact that human existence, because of history, etc., is tragic. That our existence is tragic, yes.
So I said that in, I don't know when Sophocles wrote this, but I said that in relation to Heraclitus, in the sense that nothing is really established and everything is kind of flowing like a river. And so I wanted to add that on the notion or the things that we've been discussing, right, in ancient Greek philosophy, because there's also this like notion of faith and everything established, but there's also Heraclitus, right?
Yeah.
Where we kind of come to different terms with what we mean by faith and free will and such.
Well, the difficulty of answering that question also is related to the way in which we look at the history. So when I were to say, if I were to say to you, Descartes lived in the 13th century or Descartes lived in the 15th century, would that make a difference for you? That's really the question. So when you talk about history, it's just a blur, like in the past. Now, when we are talking about ancient philosophy, we are talking about hundreds of years of historical development. So it is very difficult to really understand the historical differences between what we consider to be history. So 15th century is very different than 13th century, very different than 19th century. For us, it's just a little mistake. Oh, I just made 150 years of error in my understanding of the historical context. But there is a huge difference between these time periods and lots of different interpretations and understandings. So we really need to be careful when we say things like that. Now, it is 441 before Christ that the play was written. And from my perspective, when you said that, I immediately thought, oh, that's roughly equivalent of Heraclitus, who is another pre-Socratic philosopher we are going to read. But then I realized, I don't really know that. It's not really like just in my head, if I were to look up the dates of Heraclitus, how he would actually, but we say, oh, they just have a common understanding, the Greeks, they all think in the same way. Just like somebody saying 200 years from now, Americans at 2020, they were roughly the same. They were all thinking the same thing while people are literally killing each other in terms of disagreement. So it's hard for us to label a culture in terms of this is what they think. So again, like, I mean, this is just a warning. It's not going to really change anything significantly. But when we talk about the individualism in the Greeks, or how did they look about good and evil, etc., probably Sophocles looked at it very different than Aristotle, and very different than Homer, etc. So it's hard for us to have accurate. Now, again, for us, maybe what it says to us today in terms of when we consider something to be good. And that's really the fantasy, like representation of the good. It can be this hero, it can be this heroine or whatever, this kind of idea, and how that in and of itself might be evil. That's more difficult to think. Yes, Travis.
So I wanted to ask Jack. Jack mentioned about the fact that the story is a tragedy, and it got me thinking. And I wanted to ask, why is it that, or why do you think that everyone who, like, everybody died because in tragedy everyone dies, but everyone dies except the perceived bad guy. He's the one that's left alive. End of the.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that's probably I mean, Ishmena didn't die either. So she's not really bad, but she didn't do what Antigone did. But maybe living is like the worst punishment. Go ahead, Isaac.
Yeah, that's how I interpret it, at least. Similar to how Oedipus stays alive but cuts his eyes out. It's like the eternal torture is worse than death.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the worst punishment, to be alive. Yeah.
Going off of like that comment, that like aligns with like my question. On in like line 460, Antigone says that like, I knew that I must die. How could I not? Even without your edict. If I die before my time, I say it is a gain. So for me, like,
Yeah.
And then yeah, she just goes on to say like, basically because my life has been like so full of sorrows and everything like that. So for me, like, I was just kind of wondering whether, yeah, it's kind of also like, this has also been like a theme during class, whether or not like Antigone's main drive, yeah, is to help, I mean, to just like, what's it called, bury her brother because it's the right thing to do, or to just do this thing that's so like outlandish and like so risky because she knew she was going to die, and like she just felt like she couldn't carry on with life anymore. So like almost like a suicidal attempt into the
Is it suicidal? Yeah, it's a suicide mission.
Because she feels like death would be a gain rather than staying alive.
Isaac?
Kind of going back to our discussion about death, it seems strange to me to call it suicide when she's assuming she's going to go to the afterlife or go to the underworld and see all these people, like be with her brother. I think that as a really strange element for me that I can't quite wrap my head around.
But I mean, okay, if I understand it correctly, she literally commits suicide at the end, right? It's not just a metaphoric committing suicide. It's like, it's a suicide mission type of thing. He hangs herself. Or maybe Haemon hangs her. No. Yes, Jared. Turn on your.
So on line 485.
45?
No, 485.
485.
It says, I am no man, and instead.
And she the man instead.
Says, I am no, Creon says, I am no man, and she the man instead, if she can have this conquest without pain. That's about like dying for her, like what she believes is her own honor, basically, right?
Let's say it again. I'm sorry. Go ahead. What was the question?
So it's like between death and individualism. It's when Creon says that, is he saying that her dying without pain, like without suffering, is that like her conquest over her fate, or is that her conquest over Creon?
Oh, I took that to be, I'm no man, I'm not capable of what she's capable of. She is the man instead. If she can have this conquest without pain, so I'm going to make sure that she has pain. That's how I read it, but I'm not sure. So she's going to punish Antigone. She's not going to make her the hero, so to speak, because then she would be the man and I would be the woman, which he uses like quite problematically as like women and Ishmena too, like we are weak. So Antigone is actually stronger than Creon. As a woman, that's just for a king impossible to accept. Yes, Travis, go ahead.
My question was, my question was from the and that I talked about on Wednesday, about when Haman and Creon were discussing, and he said, and Creon said that he was weak for siding with Antigone as a woman. So my question was, if Antigone was a guy, if it would have been the same thing, because personally I feel like it would have been the same thing, just because the law said that if you tried to bury Polynices, then you would die. But I still wonder, because in the line he said if it was a man, he said he'd rather side with a man and a woman in that line. So I was still wondering, if Antigone was a guy, it would have been slightly different.
Can you find that passage exactly what number that is?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
He talk with that's towards the beginning, right? The one he talks with Haman. When does Haman enter the scene?
So it's around 7:55.
What's that again?
Around 7:40. 7:40. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Line 7:40.
Oh, that's right. Okay, so, yeah, that's, thank you. Okay, 7:40. So am I, okay, I read at 7:40, am I to rule by other mind than mine? That's what Creon says.
Be that.
Now, am I to rule by other mind than mine?
Oh, I did, because it's on my phone, so I guess the lines are different. I don't know.
Line 7:40, you said, or what did you say?
Yeah, line 7:40.
So where do you see, okay, read it because I can't find it.
So it says,
Okay.
yeah, it says, it seems firm
Okay.
on the woman's side, and then Creon, and then Haman says, if you're a woman, it's you I care for. And then Creon says, wicked to try conclusion with your father, and it goes on.
Well, I read that not as what if Antigone was a man or something like that. Creon insults Haman, saying that you are taking the side of the woman.
Mm-hmm.
And Haman says, if you are a woman, because I'm taking your side, I'm actually taking, it is you I care for. So it doesn't matter for me whether you are a woman or a man. I'm actually siding with you. I want to protect your reputation. I want to make sure that people don't think that you are an unfair king. That's how I read it, but maybe, yeah, what does that mean? Anybody else? So it seems he's firm, like it seems he is firmly on the side, on the woman's side. I think that this is Creon says this not to Haman, I think, because Haman is the one that he's talking to. So he's just saying this in general. Haman is siding with the woman, and Haman says, if you are a woman, it is you I care for. What's that mean?
So, I mean, I read that basically as just like him on being clever, more or less, like basically just trying to drive the point home that because Karen is saying like, Haemon clearly cares about Antigone more than me, and Haemon's trying to reinforce like, no, I care about you as my father, and trying to make sure that you don't make this decision that will set the whole town against you. And him saying, if you are a woman, it is you I care for, like that just seems to be like a snappy comeback, or at least that's how I read it. I didn't read much deeper significance into it, but I could be wrong in that reading.
Okay, I think that there's another translation that I have. It goes something like, it seems, Creon says this to the chorus, says, it seems this boy fights on the woman's side. This is another translation. And then Haemon says, only if you are the woman, you are my concern. So I think that's the, don't, like, I mean, Creon seems to be insulting Haemon for taking the woman's side. And Haemon says, I take side. And if by that you mean you are a woman, then okay, yes, that's a kind of clever comeback to say that I care for you actually. So that, according to your logic, you must be the woman.
It seems like there's a part of this that is maybe really modern in some way, because there's a detachment between the concept of what it is to be male or female and male and female bodies. And so in this passage, and then again when he says that, if she had this glorious death without pain, then she would be a man. Yeah. And it still sucks because I guess the concept of female means like weakness and subordinate, but there's still that separation between sex and gender, I guess.
And
I think that's always been the case. We just didn't notice that until recently. I mean, the fact that sex and gender are not the same. Yeah, you're right. I agree. I mean, I don't know whether I would say modern, but conceptually it is there, definitely. Yes. Isaac, do you have your hand up? Do you? Oh.
Yeah, sorry. I just had another passage that I read that made me think the exact same thing. Around line 580, it says, Creon says, slaves take them in, they must be women now, no more free running. Which I just found super interesting. I don't know what other people think about that. Like, they're only women. Yeah, like they're only women, or they had somehow not been women when they were acting against the state and making their own decisions and breaking the law.
Yeah. They must know their place. They must be women now. So they are not being women by going against me. Slaves take them in, they are going to become women. Yeah, he doesn't seem to be very comfortable with himself. But then he doesn't kill. He doesn't kill Ishmael. Any thoughts about that passage?
It's me.
Travis, go ahead. Sorry.
I have another line to he said, around 680, he says, better if it must happen that a man should overstep me, I won't be called weaker than womankind.
680? Okay, yeah. Yeah. He seems to have a lot of issues with crayon, like with women, But on the other hand, I mean, what is Haman's motivation here? Does he really think that what Antigone did was accepted or even supported by people? Or does he love Antigone and he doesn't want her to die? Because then there is that thing about the chorus talks about love, how it is the cause of a lot of problems. Which is also one of those concepts that I actually think love is presented as really good, but it is in its purest form, it's actually evil. So how can we actually notice that? Well, I mean, I was teaching a class on this, but just the sort of short version is for love to make sense, not sort of like Christian love that I love everybody and like my love is universal, in which case it's an empty concept that doesn't really do anything for me or anybody for that matter. It discriminates it in the sense that I love this person by its very definition means this person is outside of that love. But we never really think of that. But if you are like a parent, you would really very sort of proudly say, if anybody teaches my son and daughter, I'll kill and destroy them because I love them so much, which sounds really great, but it is actually problematic because you are possibly killing innocent people because whatever. So it is a complicated concept in terms of how we define the idea of discrimination. And most of the time that it is meaningless because, you can say, I love you because of this or that and that, but sometimes it is completely irrational. I have no idea what I love you. I cannot control it. I don't know what it is, but that inevitably leads what you exclude from your domain of love. So, I love this country. Well, that means you kind of hate other countries. And I love, this. And then that kind of means that if not hate, at least you exclude the opposite of what you love. So as a feeling, it doesn't really fulfill the kind of glorious unifying force that we want from it. So that's why I'm a little suspicious. And then chorus says that too. I can't find it now, but if you find that section, oh, it's right here, 785. Love, unconquered in fight, love who falls on our possession. You rest at night in the soft bloom of a girl's face. You cross the sea, you are known to the wildest layer. Not the immortal gods can escape you, nor man of a day. Who has you within him is mad. Yeah. Love is also madness, which is cool. Yeah. Turn on your.
What if someone says, I love, like for the example of countries, I love every country, but I love this country a little bit more than the rest. Does that like point of discrimination still stand? Because like they still love. Like I'm also thinking about this within the context of like Christian love, in terms of like I love everyone, and like I have to, but then there's people that I love more. Like I all love differently.
Well, sure. I mean, it's very complicated, and there are like different types of love, like the amorous love of like someone as opposed to familial and filial love, etc. But I think that what in this context, it is not a question of quantity that is the problem. It's the question of category that is the problem. So for love to make sense as a term or as a feeling or as a concept, it has to be contrasted with other things. And that's really is both a linguistic and a conceptual problem. We sort of forget about the underbelly of love. We just concentrate on its unifying element, but it always has to exclude something. And in the mere fact that if your partner says to you, I love you, but I love a bunch of other people, even if your partner is a computer program, like in the case of Her, the movie, the guy gets jealous. It's like, oh, you have 64,000 other lovers? That's an issue. So there is that element of love which always implies its opposite, to make sense. Now, that we can soften the blow, we can try to make it work in terms of, but then it doesn't do anything. Like if you love everybody, you don't really love anybody. Because they're all the same. Like it doesn't discriminate which love should do. And whenever you use the expression, you always have, I love this music, which means I don't like this other type of music. I love you better means that I don't love every other person. Now again, maybe we'll get rid of that. Maybe our conception will change. Maybe we are all being polyamorous and like love everybody, blah, blah. But in terms of human capability, maybe God can love everybody because that's God. But we as mortal beings are not capable of that. And I have daughters. I experienced the same kind of feeling. Like I used to like children before my daughters were born. After that, I don't like them anymore. Yes, Jose.
Yeah. So on lines 470, since you're talking about this kind of opposite or whatever, it says, and if you think my acts are foolishness, the foolishness might be in a fool's eye, which I thought was really interesting in talking about this kind of dialectic of so what does that mean then, like in this context, like Antigone is telling Creon to that basically everything he's done in the name of the law is the opposite of what he should have done, right?
Well, in terms of foolishness, definitely. So if you think that my acts are foolishness going against your law, yours is actually the one who sees the foolishness is the fool's eye, because Creon is the fool, because he is the one actually who is going against the higher law. So it again demonstrates the symmetry between Creon and Antigone. Like Creon thinks that, oh, you are being foolish, you are a woman, you are acting irrationally out of love, you are acting out of emotions and familial sort of connection. But Antigone says, well, you're exactly the same. So, I mean, we always have this kind of, again, Nancy was saying the opposition between the male and female. Like female is like emotional, etc. Creon is like the emotional wreck. Like he is the one who is actually experiencing that the most, and Antigone's decisions are out of respect for a higher law, whereas Creon seems to be pretty obsessed with his own edict, which is not really even a law, like in the way that and also, like, I will, yeah, this brings me to the question that I wanted to ask, like, what kind of an edict is that? Does Creon say, no one who fights against the state will be buried? Or is he saying just Polynices is not going to be buried? Because one is a law, the other one is like a really personal attack on Polynices. So what is the law here? Like, you know, the ones who betray the country, the state will not be buried, which is like, I'm going to continue offend the gods as long as this treason business continues, or it's just Polynices, in which case it's not really a law, strictly speaking. Go ahead.
Yeah, I believe it. I read in the section before the actual play starts that it varies by the different translations, but in this one it is just Polynices that the edict says you can't bury. But I think that's still really interesting, even if it does vary between the different translations. Like, I think it kind of connects to the conversation we're having about love, in that he had a relationship with Polynices. He was his nephew, I guess, that turned against the state and tried to invade and destroy the city. So yeah, it just kind of connects to what we're talking about, how love
Because
divides.
it's not a law, it's an order, it's a command. Do not bury Polynices is different than saying nobody who goes against the state shall be buried from now on, which would be the state law. Yeah, bless it.
Don't know if like that makes a difference, because like the he gives the order that like
he gives what?
He gives the order that like we can't bury Polynices. Whether or not that's a personal attack, for me, I think it's irrelevant, because like the law states that like you must obey your king. So regardless of whether or not it's what's it called, an order, or like, and there's reasons for the order, like you're still required to follow what he says by law.
But the problem comes, anybody else has something? So the problem comes like, Creon might change his mind, and as you yourself said, he does change his mind. So a law that can somehow change according to the whim of the ruler probably doesn't have the same weight and the compelling nature as other laws of the state. So that's the difficulty. So then you are just going against Creon, not against the state itself. That's maybe the distinction. Yeah, Kate.
I would argue though that like that's not how Creon.
Wait, they don't hear you. Yeah.
Sorry. I thought I'd hit it. I was gonna say I don't think that's the way that Creon sees it though. Like I think that he assumes himself to be the state. Like he has absorbed that as his identity.
Yeah, no, that's true.
On its development. I don't know if that truly affects it. I mean, I think it affects it from his perspective.
No,
But
that's
as
absolutely
readers,
right.
I think
That's a good
important
point,
thing to know.
because Creon definitely thinks that he is the state and whatever I say is the law, which is a little different than how we understand the law. Just to underline that point, I made that, but you're absolutely right. For as far as Creon is concerned, you have to listen to him. His word is his law. Jose, go ahead.
But I also think, also along with what Kate said, it's a very good representation of how laws are now, right? Because we can definitely say that Creon is a good law or whatever politician, in the sense that he's not fixed with the law. Like laws are like, again, Heraclitus, right? Like women couldn't vote like 100 years ago, and now they can, right? Like, why would we stay fixed with the law, right? So we can also make the case that with Heraclitus, that Creon is doing what contemporary politics should do, in a sense.
No, that's it. That again, maybe Blessed would like that because that sort of fosters Creon's position. Yeah, go ahead.
But at the same time, I understand that I feel like we'd be having a different conversation if well, obviously we would be, but then if Creon refuses to go back on his word and doesn't change his mind, then I feel like that kind of strengthens his position even more because then it shows that he made a decision and he sticks by it, and that's kind of what we expect from our leaders of today. So the fact that he does decide that, oh damn, I have to go back on this, I feel like that kind of weakens his position in a sense.
So he's kind of the victim of his own understanding of his position because you can actually prove to be stronger if you change your position than you to keep it, sort of insist on it and be stubborn. No, that's a good point. But I thought he's also kind of fighting for the secular authority. My authority trumps God's authority. That's he says at some point, I'm the king. And he seems to be fighting for, historically at least, for the secular state. Because today maybe, I don't even know, I don't even know anything about today anymore. So I'm just gonna throw this out there. I don't know what people are thinking, what they are saying, etc. But it seems like we are more on the side of the secular authority. But, should we just allow ourselves to be ruled by God? Whatever that means, that also seems to be the rule of people, except different people. Here, at least, God kind of show up in the person and tell you what they want. I mean, not exactly. Actually, the soothsayer, the prophet, interprets what the gods say. But yeah, Jared and then Isaac.
I was gonna
turn on your
I was gonna say with connection to Tiresias, the prophet, on line 1000, when he starts saying what he saw in his augury, he says that he heard birds' cries it says, and heard bird cries I'd never known. They screeched about goaded by madness, inarticulate. Well, if we connect what we said earlier, where the chorus said love is madness, then these birds would just be flying around, chirping, and then it says, just chirping like birds do, I guess, because it says right after that, I marked that they were tearing one another with claws of murder. I could hear the wing beats, but it just sounds like a couple of birds whenever they're going to mate flying through the air.
They're crazy, like they act mad. No, I read that as gods are so angry, they are not even giving him clear signs. Because usually the prophets, the soothsayers interpret the birds. The bird interpreter, that is the ancient Greek sort of conception of telling the future, according to what God said. So yeah, I mean, it is sort of, they are really mad with Creon and they are really going to punish him. No, that's a good point, yeah. Isaac, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think it's important to know that Creon is fighting for a very specific type of secular state.
Yeah, which is
authoritarian. He specifically says, what should I rule by what the people think? Come on. And he wants to when he's talking about what he values in a person, he's talking about the best person, totally obedient to the state, never do anything against the state. And so I think that's part of the central question of the play here.
Correct, absolutely. But you also know that the term democracy comes from ancient Greece, where they literally invented quote unquote, invented the practice of democracy, the rule of the people. But they really had a very interesting relationship with the gods, even in that alleged rule of the people. But it is Thebes, not Athens, so it's a different. So even when we say the Greeks, we really speak about a specific historical period, specific time, not like the Greeks, ancient Greeks all the time. But yes, he seems to think that he's, but it is secular by virtue of him not being a god. So that's just it. Like whoever rules, the people, the king, etc., it's still the people, the not mortals. And this place seems to actually, at the end, say, just listen to the elders, listen to the gods, don't make the gods mad. So I guess even then you have to sort of pay lip service to religious convictions so that people come to your play and watch you.
Yeah, I'm a little bit ignorant about ancient Greek history. So like democracy is being practiced at the time when this play was written?
Okay, again, with respect to times, in Athens, where Socrates, Plato were, it was certainly, he died, Socrates died is 399, so he's still alive when this play is written. So yes, in Athens, there is a democracy, like only man, only non-slaves, etc. So it's still like a little like American democracy, but it is not like a oligarchy or monarchy or yeah.
Hi,
So
Farid.
it isn't. I mean, the word comes from demos, which is the Greek term for people, and Krasi is the Kreon, actually, the ruler. So. Go ahead.
On like 738.
738.
Yeah, Creon said that custom gives the possession to the ruler. About it.
Custom gives what?
Custom gives possession to the ruler.
What do you? Okay.
You see that?
Okay. So how do you read that? What do you think that means?
Like, does it mean that Creon think that is a norm that people should follow him, and he thinks that his ancestor like will support him in his doing?
Yes, there is also, yeah, you're right. There is also a tradition. Somebody said that last time too. I think it was you, Travis, even in Christianity, that you have to follow the law of the land, right? So, but the custom gives possession to the ruler, the sort of customarily, yes, it is not my property, maybe the city, as Haman says, no city is property of a single man. But custom gives to the possession to the ruler, so it's yours. So you'd rule a desert beautifully alone. So like, there are other people you can't really. I mean, they obviously have slaves, so there is a kind of property, owning property, people as property, and you can probably have the city as your property too. Although possession is always temporary, because he's gonna die. Yes.
So on line, what is that, like about 1040, 1040, it says, Creon says, I wouldn't give him up for burial in fear of that pollution, for I know no mortal being can pollute the gods. So he's talking about, what's the guy's name? Pericles?
Polynices?
Polynices, yeah. He's saying that it seems like he's saying that like his body is a possession of his. He wouldn't give him up for burial.
I see. Okay. So this is after he decided to. 10:40, you said?
Yeah, this is when he's talking to Tiresias.
Tiresias, okay. I wouldn't give him up in fear of that pollution. So you read that as he possesses his body too? Huh. Yeah, I didn't think that at the time, but yeah. Huh. Okay, cool. Yeah, you guys did really well. Thank you. That's cool. I like this. It comes up. So, okay, so it's 11. Bill, on Monday, on Monday we'll meet online. But this actually worked much better than I imagined compared to the last class. So